Thank you. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. My name is Michael Anthony. I build and run Vertify. We're building an MRV platform, MRV tool for nature, purely based on geospatial data. Pleasure to be here. I've been in the sustainability space for 20 years, or I should probably say rather 20 years ago, setting up a sustainability task force in Allianz, the insurance company. And back then we were sort of the odd tree huggers on the side, and I'm glad to see that you can fill conference venues these days with topics on sustainability. We spun off from a public-private partnership for the reinsurance sector using geospatial data for agricultural risk management across Asia. Swiss Re, SCOR, Allianz Re and others were involved in that exercise. And now we focus on we still focus on agriculture. We still have clients in the agricultural space, but shifting more to a focus in responsible sourcing and helping companies in the space of responsible sourcing, commodities, of course also the carbon space, but particularly also in the nature space, to manage the legislation that is going to come on transparency in nature. This is something I'm going to shed some light on, give you an idea of the data that can be used, and share with you some case studies that we're building on the way to eventually for us to build a platform. We're starting now with case studies, and I'll give you a peek into our workbench on the type of things that we are currently building and examining. So carbon and nature, not everything. Carbon and nature are sort of the two markets that we're preparing for and that we started to cater for. Of course, in the carbon market, this is a voluntary market primarily, which is driven by voluntary standards. In the nature or ESG market, we see increasingly that this is something that legislation is carving out. So here companies initially converged around sector-specific standards, so the Global Coffee Platform, the Better Cotton Initiative, Responsible Minerals Initiatives and others. TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosure, is sort of pulling together the financial industry on carving out what are best practices, what are data sets to monitor the impact of financial and eventually industrial activities on nature. But a lot is happening on the legislative space, with the EU having several legislations in the pipeline. Deforestation-free supply chain is just one of them. There are two other major initiatives coming out of it. The French have an Article 29, specifically on biodiversity, and Germany is implementing their Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. Mind you, that was one word, which is putting a lot of strain on many German companies now to pull their act together and understand what's happening in their supply chain and what's particularly happening around the sourcing of their commodities. And the focus is going to be to provide, or the solution rather, is going to be to provide geospatial data layers of nature around particular industry assets, or not, if it's not an industry asset, if it's not infrastructure, then it would, in the agricultural commodity space, probably different agricultural commodities that we can map. There are a number of great solutions already out there from the NGO community, from IBAT, BirdLife International, IUCN, World Resource Institute and others, but they're all, in terms of their usabilities, they all have some limitations in terms of very often the spatial resolution. So what can you see? How precise vis-a-vis a particular asset can you actually see something? They're sometimes a bit complicated to deal with, or they lack an API. So this is the space where, or the niche where we would, where we are beginning to move into being more pragmatic, being more scalable, affordable, and actually having an operational tool to eventually measure environmental parameters from space. And I'll give you sort of a view on some of the examples. Before that, just to kind of understand those different layers. Of course, you have the asset data, which has a GPS coordinate, or even a polygon, if the asset is a field where you source an agricultural commodity. Cotton, for that matter, is a commodity that we're currently doing some work on. And then you overlay the biodiversity data. So if I stay on cotton, this would be the impact it has on the on the water consumption, or if it is we also did work on water river pollution. So then you see how a particular factory is discharging into water, and you can see through certain geospatial layers how the temperature in the water is rising. And then you run a change detection algorithm for that matter to see how things have changed over time. And then there are certain dynamic add-ons you can add if we're able to get our hands on data from sort of photography data or even newspaper clippings that provide more of a context. In terms of the satellite data, what we use is the different data sets. Of course, there are a number of satellites basically flying out there in orbit. Some of them are from commercial providers. They're generally very expensive, not so sophisticated perhaps as the public providers, the NASA and the European Space Agency. So radar sensor is one. So oil spills, for example, we can detect very well based on radar sensors. Optical sensors is sort of the first go-to place. And then there are hyperspectral sensors. Once we look into minerals, geology, soil parameters, we're actually using also hyperspectral parameters, but they're not so readily available yet. And we generate insights from that, such as, I'm jumping over this one, such as, for example, what is the impact of lithium exploration on groundwater. So lithium exploration is, of course, extremely important for as being an important transition mineral. But accusation is there that it's using a lot of groundwater with a negative effect on agriculture. And here, what you can see here very well is we observe the surface water dynamics. So you see one image from July 21. There was no site in place. The river was sort of flowing happily, and there's not a lot of water. This is Argentina in the Atacama Desert, so rivers are rare, but this one was there. And then exactly 1 year later, July of this year, the new exploration site has been set up. The river is drying out, so very obvious evidence you can get. And we looked at the same site using radar satellite data. So on the left, it was optical satellite data. On the right, it's radar satellite data, and radar has the ability to capture soil moisture. And we looked into the decrease of soil moisture that was also evident in this case. Another one is cotton. Now, a lot of cotton is being brought in from China, particularly from Western China, the Xinjiang province, where the allegation by human rights groups and also the UN is that forced labor is being deployed to harvest, and the government says, of course, that's not possible because we are harvesting everything by machine, so how can there be any forced labor? Well, we looked into how the harvesting practices are, and we looked into sort of several areas, and there are a number of areas where cotton is being harvested by hands, not by machines, and then we overlaid this with these forced labor camps. And there you have at least something that if you are a importer from cotton, something where you would have to look into in greater detail. Forest, of course, is also one. I mean, that has been talked about here in many cases, focuses on deforestation, but also other forest parameters that we are looking into. And I think I'll leave it here because there's only 1 minute left in case there are some questions.
There's 2 minutes, actually.
2 minutes. Oh, this one gives me only 1 minute. Okay. So if you have any case that you're looking to examine, or a client of yours, then we're currently collecting cases across different sectors, of course, guided by the sustainability standards in those different sectors. Cotton has the Better Cotton Initiative. The Responsible Minerals have their initiatives and their criteria, rather. And we're looking which of those criteria can we build based on geospatial data. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. Are there any questions? No? I think you were pretty clear. Thank you so much.